Hello, everyone. I know many of you are listening to this while preparing for sleep. Before we begin, take a moment to notice where you are and what time it is for you right now. You don't need to type anything if you're already drifting off. And if you enjoy calm stories like this, you can gently support the channel by liking and subscribing. Whenever you feel comfortable, now, let the rain fade into the background and allow the story to unfold slowly. The town of Willow Creek was the kind of place people described as quiet with pride. Tree-lined streets, unlocked doors, and neighbors who waved every morning. Nothing ever really happened there, or so everyone believed. Until the night Daniel Harper disappeared. Daniel was a 42-year-old accountant who lived alone in a modest blue house at the end of Cedar Lane. He was polite, predictable, and deeply observant. He noticed things most people ignored: unfamiliar cars, late-night footsteps, arguments whispered behind closed doors. Some said he was too curious. Others said he was simply careful. 3 days before he vanished, Daniel told his sister something strange over the phone. He said, "If anything happens to me, look at the people closest to me. Someone here isn't who they pretend to be." Those were the last words she would ever hear from him. When Daniel failed to show up for work, police performed a welfare check. His house was spotless. No signs of struggle. His phone, wallet, and keys were all still inside. The only thing missing was Daniel himself. At first, investigators assumed he had left voluntarily. Adults do that after all. But the neighbors disagreed. Daniel never traveled without warning, he never missed work, and he never ignored his sister's calls. As detectives began knocking on doors, one neighbor stood out: Mark Ellis, the friendly man next door who always offered to help carry groceries or fix broken fences. He was cooperative, calm, and overly eager to assist. He even provided a detailed timeline of his own movements the night Daniel disappeared. Too detailed. Mark claimed he had gone to bed early. Yet another neighbor mentioned seeing his porch light on well past midnight. When questioned again, Mark changed his story slightly. Just small inconsistencies, the kind people dismiss at first. Then came the notebook. While searching Daniel's home a second time, police found a small notebook hidden behind a row of old books. Inside were dates, times, and short observations. License plates, late-night visitors, arguments overheard. Many entries ended with the same initials: M.E. Mark Ellis. According to the notes, Daniel had grown suspicious of his neighbor's late-night activities. He believed Mark was involved in something illegal, possibly connected to thefts reported in nearby towns. One final entry, written just 2 days before Daniel vanished, read, "I think he knows I'm watching." Investigators returned to Mark's house with a warrant. In the garage, they found tools that matched marks discovered later at a remote construction site outside town. Cadaver dogs alerted near a patch of recently disturbed ground. Beneath the soil, they found evidence confirming what many had feared. Confronted with the findings, Mark finally broke. He admitted that Daniel had confronted him late one night, threatening to go to the police. The argument escalated. What began as fear turned into rage, and then into a decision that couldn't be undone. The town of Willow Creek changed forever after that. People stopped saying nothing ever happens here. Neighbors locked their doors, curtains stayed closed a little longer at night, and people learned an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't a stranger at all, but the one who smiles and waves every morning. Daniel Harper hadn't been wrong. He knew too much. For decades, the town of Briar Hollow had survived on its reputation. Quiet, safe, friendly. The kind of place where children rode bikes until sunset and everyone knew each other's names. Crime was something that happened elsewhere, on the news in big cities, never here. That illusion shattered the morning Clara Whitman didn't show up for work. Clara was the town librarian, a woman in her early 30s known for her gentle voice and routine-driven life. Every weekday at exactly 8:15 a.m., she unlocked the front doors. When the library remained dark past 9, people began to worry. Police found Clara's car still parked in her driveway. Her purse sat neatly on the kitchen counter. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no note. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. At first, investigators treated it as a missing person case. Volunteers searched nearby woods. Flyers went up on every bulletin board. Candlelight vigils filled the town square. Briar Hollow mourned together and reassured itself that Clara would be found. But weeks passed. Then months. Rumors began to surface. Some said Clara had been planning to leave town. Others whispered about a secret relationship. A few claimed she had discovered something she shouldn't have while organizing old town records in the library basement. That last rumor caught a detective's attention. The basement held decades of archived documents, council meeting notes, land records, police logs going back nearly 50 years. When investigators reviewed the sign-in sheets, they noticed Clara had spent many late evenings down there shortly before disappearing. One file, however, was missing. It was an old folder labeled simply Property Reassignment, 1989. Digging deeper, detectives uncovered a troubling pattern. Several properties in Briar Hollow had changed ownership under suspicious circumstances decades earlier. Fires, sudden deaths, families forced to leave. Each case had been quietly approved by the same small group of town officials. All of them still lived in Briar Hollow. One name appeared again and again at the bottom of the approvals: Harold Beckett. Former council head, respected elder, and lifelong pillar of the community. When questioned, Harold appeared shocked by the allegations. He claimed not to remember much from that time. Age, he said, had taken its toll. But investigators noticed something strange. He became visibly nervous when Clara's name was mentioned. A search of his property revealed a locked shed behind his garage. Inside were boxes of old files, carefully preserved. Among them was the missing folder, and inside that folder, a handwritten note in Clara's unmistakable handwriting. "I know what they did. I think they know I know." Further digging revealed the truth Briar Hollow had buried for decades. Years ago, several families had been forced off their land through intimidation and falsified records. When one man tried to expose it, he disappeared. His case was quietly closed. The town moved on. Clara had discovered everything. Under mounting pressure, one of the former officials finally confessed. Clara had confronted them privately, believing the truth should come out. Panic followed. A terrible decision was made to silence her, just as they had done before. Her remains were later recovered from a remote wooded area outside town, hidden for years. The revelation destroyed Briar Hollow's image overnight. Long-respected figures were arrested. Courtrooms filled. Families were divided. Trust collapsed. Today, the town is quieter than ever. Not peaceful, but heavy, because everyone there understands the same haunting truth now. The darkest secrets aren't always hidden by strangers. Sometimes they're protected for decades by an entire town. For nearly 7 years, the murder of Elena Brooks sat cold in the evidence room of Ridgeview County. Her case file was thick, dusty, and untouched, a quiet reminder of a failure no one liked to talk about. Elena was found dead in her apartment one winter morning. There were no signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no weapon, just a single unanswered question: who had been with her the night before? At the time, police interviewed friends, co-workers, neighbors, and family. Everyone said the same thing. Elena was kind, private, predictable. She worked at a small insurance office, went home at the same time every day, and rarely went out late. There were no known enemies. No obvious motive. The case slowly went cold. Years passed. Detectives retired. New ones took their place. And Elena's name became just another line in a database of unsolved crimes. Until a routine traffic stop changed everything. One evening, Officer James Rowe pulled over a man named Victor Hale for a broken taillight. It should have been a simple warning. But during casual conversation, Victor began talking. Too much. Nervous chatter, inconsistent details about where he'd been, who he lived with, how long he'd worked in town. Then he casually mentioned something strange. "I used to live near that woman who died years ago," he said. "The one in the apartment on Willow Street. Sad thing. I remember the police coming that night." Officer Rowe paused. That detail had never been released to the public. Records showed that the address had been deliberately kept confidential during the investigation. The location was known only to law enforcement and a small circle of people interviewed early on. Rowe asked Victor how he knew the address. Victor laughed and said, "Everyone knew. Small town, right?" But his tone shifted, his hands shook, his answers became shorter. The stop ended, but a report was filed. Detectives reopened the case and began quietly looking into Victor Hale. On paper, he seemed unremarkable. He had worked various short-term jobs. He moved often. No criminal record beyond minor offenses. But his timeline revealed something disturbing. He had lived in the apartment directly below Elena at the time of her death. That fact had somehow slipped through the cracks years earlier. Investigators brought Victor in for questioning. At first he denied knowing her at all. Then he said they had spoken once or twice. Later he claimed they argued about noise. His story changed slightly every time. Finally, detectives used a strategy they'd perfected over years. They told him they already knew what happened, and they just needed him to explain why. That's when the lie came out. Victor said, "I didn't mean to hurt her. She threatened to call the police." It was the first time he admitted being inside her apartment. From there, everything unraveled. Evidence that had once seemed meaningless suddenly fit together. Fibers, old maintenance logs, a partial fingerprint dismissed years earlier. Piece by piece, the truth emerged. Victor had gone upstairs that night to complain. The argument escalated. Panic took over, and in a moment he could never undo, Elena lost her life. In court, the defense tried to argue that the confession was misunderstood, that it was pressure, confusion, poor memory. But the damage was done. One lie during a traffic stop had reopened a case the killer thought was buried forever. When the verdict came back guilty, Elena's family sat silently, holding hands. There were no cheers, no celebration. Just relief, quiet and heavy. After 7 years, the truth had finally spoken. And all because of one careless lie that should never have been told. At exactly 12:07 a.m., the security camera outside the Lakeside Apartments captured a woman stepping into the parking lot. She wore a light jacket, her phone in her hand, and walked with purpose, as if she expected to be right back. That was the last confirmed image of Rachel Monroe, age 29. By morning, her apartment door was still locked from the inside. Her bed was neatly made. Her phone charger sat plugged in, but Rachel was gone. At first, police believed it might be a misunderstanding. Maybe she had gone for a walk, maybe she stayed with a friend. But hours turned into days, and her silence became terrifying. Rachel was reliable, organized, careful. She never disappeared without telling someone. Her sister told investigators, if Rachel didn't show up, something was wrong. The case quickly became one of the most puzzling in the department's history. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood, no forced entry, no suspicious messages. Her bank account remained untouched. Her social media went silent at 12:09 a.m. Only one detail stood out. At 12:11 a.m., a car exited the apartment complex, just outside the camera's main angle. Only the rear lights were visible. The license plate couldn't be read. Police interviewed every resident. Most were half asleep that night. A few heard nothing. One man, however, claimed he had heard voices arguing briefly near the stairwell. That man was Evan Carter, who lived 2 doors down. Evan was polite, soft-spoken, and eager to help. He said he had been awake watching television and heard a woman arguing on the phone, not in person. He said he never saw Rachel that night. But investigators noticed something odd. Evan described details that hadn't been released. The direction Rachel walked, the time she left, even what she was wearing. When asked how he knew those things, he said, "Everyone's been talking about it." They hadn't. Still, without evidence, police could do little. The case stalled. Months passed. Then years. Detectives rotated. Leads dried up. Rachel's photos stayed on the wall, slowly fading under fluorescent lights. The case haunted those who worked it. 5 years later, a new detective reopened the file and reviewed every interview from the beginning. One detail stood out immediately. Evan's original statement had changed subtly over time. His memory seemed to adjust to match new information as it became public. The detective requested a search warrant based on inconsistencies and new forensic technology. Behind Evan's building, beneath a patch of concrete near an old storage area, ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly. When the concrete was broken, investigators found what they had feared for years. Rachel Monroe had never left the property. Confronted with the evidence, Evan finally spoke. He admitted that he had approached Rachel that night under the pretense of needing help. An argument followed. Panic took over. One moment changed everything. He thought hiding the truth would make it disappear. Instead, it followed him for years. The arrest made national headlines. Reporters flooded the quiet lakeside town. Residents struggled to understand how someone so normal could hide something so terrible for so long. At sentencing, the judge spoke directly to Evan. "You lived freely while a family lived in uncertainty. That silence was its own crime." Rachel's family later released a statement thanking investigators who never gave up. They said knowing the truth, even years later, finally allowed them to grieve. And for the police department, the case became a reminder etched into Training Ma. Newell's and Memory alike, some crimes don't scream for attention. They wait, quietly, until someone finally listens. Everyone on Brookside Court trusted Laura Bennett. She baked cookies for new neighbors. She organized holiday potlucks. She waved every morning with the same warm smile that made people feel instantly at ease. If you asked anyone to describe her, they'd say the same thing: kind, quiet, harmless. That's why no one suspected her when Thomas Reed went missing. Thomas lived 2 houses down from Laura. He was a private man in his late 30s, who worked from home and kept mostly to himself. He waved politely but rarely joined neighborhood events. Still, he was dependable. His trash always went out on time, his car was always parked in the same spot, and he never missed his weekly call with his sister. Until one Sunday, the call never came. His sister reported him missing after 3 days of silence. Police entered his home expecting to find clues. Instead, they found something unsettling in its neatness. The bed was made, the sink was clean, his laptop sat open on the desk, paused mid-email. There were no signs of a struggle. At first, investigators assumed Thomas had chosen to leave. Adults do that, they reasoned, but his bank account showed no activity. His passport was still in a drawer. His phone had last pinged less than a mile from home. The neighborhood was canvassed. Laura was one of the first to speak with police. She seemed genuinely concerned. She told officers she had seen Thomas the previous evening, carrying groceries. She even remembered what he was wearing: a gray hoodie and dark jeans. That detail raised a quiet red flag. Police records showed Thomas had not gone grocery shopping that day. Still, Laura's friendliness made her an unlikely suspect. She offered tea to detectives, apologized repeatedly for not being more helpful, and asked to be kept updated. Her composure was flawless. Too flawless. When detectives reviewed security footage from nearby homes, they noticed something strange. A camera 2 doors down captured Laura walking toward Thomas's house late that night, long after she claimed to be asleep. Another camera showed her returning alone just before midnight. When questioned again, Laura said she had gone out for a walk because she couldn't sleep. But her earlier statement hadn't mentioned that. Small contradictions began to stack up. Investigators obtained a warrant to search her home. What they found behind a false panel in the basement changed everything. There were personal items belonging to Thomas. His watch, his wallet, and his phone, powered off and carefully wrapped. Nearby were cleaning supplies, gloves, and a notebook filled with tightly written thoughts. Many pages described resentment toward people who look down on me and neighbors who pretend to be better. The perfect smile, it turned out, hid years of anger. Confronted with the evidence, Laura broke. She admitted that Thomas had confronted her weeks earlier after noticing her watching him through his window late at night. She claimed he threatened to report her behavior. Fear turned into obsession. Obsession into panic. One argument, one moment, one irreversible act. The neighborhood was stunned when the truth came out. The woman who organized bake sales and waved from her porch had lived a double life just feet away from everyone. At sentencing, the courtroom was silent as the judge spoke. "Evil does not always announce itself," he said. "Sometimes it smiles, bakes cookies, and lives right next door." Today, Brookside Court looks the same as it always did. Lawns trimmed, curtains drawn, friendly waves exchanged. But the people who live there now understand something they didn't before. You never truly know what's hiding behind a perfect smile. At 2:17 a.m., the phone rang in Detective Aaron Cole's apartment. He almost ignored it. Cases didn't usually call at that hour unless something had gone very wrong, or very right. When he finally picked up, the voice on the other end was shaking. I think I know what happened to Megan Price. The name hit him instantly. Megan Price had vanished 3 years earlier. She was 26, a graduate student, responsible and cautious. One night she left her apartment to clear her head and never came back. Her phone was later found near a bus stop, wiped clean. No witnesses, no suspects. The case had slowly gone cold. "Who is this?" Cole asked. There was a pause. Then the caller whispered, "I can't say. But check the storage unit on Harbor Road, Unit 317. Please, just check it." The line went dead. By morning, detectives were at the storage facility with a warrant. The manager said Unit 317 had been rented for years under a man named Paul Renner, a quiet warehouse supervisor with no criminal history. When officers cut the lock and rolled open the metal door, the air inside was stale and heavy. At first glance, it looked like ordinary clutter: boxes, tools, plastic bins. Then they saw the suitcase. Inside were personal items identified as Megan's: her scarf, her notebook, her student ID. Beneath them were traces that confirmed what everyone feared. The phone call had been real. Paul Renner was brought in for questioning that same afternoon. He appeared calm, even confused. He said he barely knew Megan, claimed she was just someone from the neighborhood. He denied owning the storage unit despite his name being on the lease. But detectives had learned something over the years. People lie most when they think they're in control. Phone records showed Paul had called Megan repeatedly in the weeks before her disappearance. Messages revealed he had grown increasingly angry when she stopped responding. He had convinced himself she owed him attention, explanations, time. When confronted with the evidence, Paul's composure cracked. He admitted they had argued the night she disappeared. He said she had agreed to meet him to talk things out. He claimed it got heated, that she threatened to report him, that he panicked. The call that reopened the case turned out to be even more disturbing. It came from Paul himself. During questioning, he admitted he had placed the anonymous call after waking from what he described as a dream, where she was staring at me, asking why. Guilt had followed him for years, growing heavier with time. "I just wanted it to stop," he said quietly. The trial drew national attention. People struggled to understand how someone so ordinary could carry such a secret for so long. Co-workers described Paul as quiet, reliable, invisible. No one suspected him capable of violence. Megan's family finally received answers they had waited years for, painful but necessary. Her mother later said the call, though horrifying in its origin, gave them back something they had lost: certainty. Detective Cole closed the file with mixed emotions: relief, sorrow, anger, all tangled together. One late-night phone call had undone years of silence, and it became a lesson he never forgot. Sometimes the truth doesn't come from evidence, witnesses, or confessions. Sometimes it comes from guilt, calling in the dark, unable to stay quiet any longer. The house on Elm Street had been empty for nearly a decade. Paint peeled from the shutters. Weeds cracked the driveway. Neighbors avoided looking at it too long, as if staring might invite something back. Everyone agreed on one thing: whatever had happened there was better left in the past. But when the city finally scheduled the property for renovation, its secret refused to stay hidden. The house had once belonged to the Carter family, quiet, private people who kept mostly to themselves. The father, Henry Carter, was a skilled carpenter. The mother, Ruth, volunteered at the local church. Their teenage son, Leo, vanished one autumn evening and was never found. At the time, police searched the woods, the river, even neighboring towns. No clues emerged. Eventually, the case went cold. The Carters moved away not long after, and the house stood abandoned. Years later, construction workers arrived to begin repairs. On the second day, while removing warped wooden planks from the living room floor, one of them noticed something odd. The boards didn't match the rest. They were newer, cleaner, carefully fitted. When the workers lifted them, the smell hit first: old, stale, unmistakably wrong. Beneath the floor was a shallow, sealed space. Inside were personal items: a backpack, a jacket, a school notebook with a name written inside: Leo Carter. Work stopped immediately. Police were called. Forensic teams sealed off the house within the hour. The discovery shocked the town. For years, people had whispered theories. runaway, accident, stranger abduction. No one had seriously considered that the answer might have been inside the home all along. Investigators began reconstructing the family's past. Old interviews were reviewed, audio recordings replayed. Something stood out this time: inconsistencies in the parents' statements. Henry had once claimed he was working late the night Leo disappeared. In another interview, he said he had been home early. Ruth's timeline conflicted with both versions. Even more troubling were reports from neighbors who recalled frequent late-night arguments inside the house. Raised voices, slammed doors, sudden silence. Police located the Carters living quietly several states away. Both were elderly now. Babich and questioned. Ruth broke down almost immediately. She confessed that the night Leo vanished, there had been a fight. A bad one. She said Henry had lost his temper during an argument about school and discipline. She claimed she tried to stop it, that she never meant for things to go as far as they did. In a moment of panic and fear, they made a terrible choice. They hid the truth instead of facing it. Henry, when confronted, said nothing at first. Then he whispered, "We thought if no one knew, it would stop hurting, but it never did." The investigation revealed that the floor had been replaced just days after Leo's disappearance. Receipts showed materials purchased late at night. Neighbors remembered the sound of hammering long after midnight. The evidence had been there all along, sealed beneath the very place the family once gathered for dinner. The case sent shockwaves through the community. People struggled to reconcile the gentle, church-going couple they remembered with the truth that had been hidden beneath their feet. At sentencing, the judge spoke quietly but firmly. "Time does not erase responsibility. Silence does not erase harm." Today, the house on Elm Street has been demolished. Nothing stands there now but a small patch of grass and a simple marker placed by the town in memory of Leo. For years, the secret slept beneath the floorboards. But secrets, no matter how carefully buried, always find a way to surface. For 20 years, the disappearance of Sarah Collins remained one of the most painful mysteries in the town of Fairview. Sarah was 19, bright, ambitious, and weeks away from starting college. One evening, she left her part-time job at a diner and never made it home. Her car was found parked neatly behind the building, keys still inside. There were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses, no explanation. The town searched. Flyers were taped to windows. Candlelight vigils filled the park. Her parents never stopped hoping. But as years passed, hope slowly turned into silence. The case went cold. Detectives retired. Evidence gathered dust. New families moved in who barely remembered her name. To most people, Sarah Collins became just another old missing person poster from another time. Until a man walked into the police station on a rainy afternoon, 20 years later. His name was Daniel Mercer. He was 62 years old, thin, shaking, and visibly exhausted. He asked to speak to a detective and said only one thing: "I need to confess to something I've carried for 20 years. At first, officers assumed he meant a minor crime or an old secret, but when he said Sarah's name, the room went quiet. Daniel had lived in Fairview at the time of her disappearance. He worked nights as a delivery driver, and often stopped at the diner where Sarah worked. He told investigators he had spoken to her a few times, nothing unusual, nothing inappropriate. But on the night she vanished, he offered her a ride home. According to his confession, she accepted because it was late and raining. During the drive, they argued. He claimed she accused him of making her uncomfortable in the past. Words escalated. Tempers rose. What happened next, he said, was an accident born of panic and fear, a moment he had replayed in his head every day since. Afterward, instead of calling for help, he made the worst decision of his life. He hid what he had done. Daniel led investigators to a wooded area outside town, now overgrown and nearly unrecognizable from 2 decades earlier. There, buried beneath layers of soil and fallen leaves, investigators found remains that forensic testing later confirmed belonged to Sarah Collins. The confirmation devastated her family, but it also brought an end to 20 years of not knowing. When asked why he had come forward after so long, Daniel broke down. "I'm dying," he said, "and I can't carry this with me anymore. She deserves her name back. Her family deserves the truth." The confession sent shockwaves through Fairview. People struggled to understand how someone they had known for decades, quiet, polite, seemingly harmless, had lived with such a secret. At trial, Daniel pleaded guilty. The judge spoke directly to him before sentencing. "You waited 20 years to tell the truth. That delay stole peace from a family who deserved it long ago." Sarah's parents attended every hearing. In a statement read aloud, her mother said, "We lost our daughter twice. Once when she disappeared, and again every day we didn't know why. Today, at least, we finally have answers." The case closed not with relief but with reflection. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive through investigation or evidence. Sometimes it arrives through conscience. Long overdue, heavy with regret, and spoken far too late, the town of Maple Ridge prided itself on doing things the right way. People trusted one another. Doors stayed unlocked. Police knew everyone by name. Problems, when they happened, were handled quietly and quickly. That belief was exactly what made the tragedy possible. It began when 22-year-old Jonah Pierce was found unconscious behind the local hardware store late one evening. He survived, but he couldn't explain what had happened. His memory was fragmented, his injuries severe. Rumors spread faster than facts, and in a small town, rumors carried weight. Within days, suspicion settled on a man named Eric Nolan. Eric was an outsider, recently moved in, kept to himself, worked night shifts. Someone claimed they had seen him arguing with Jonah earlier that week. Someone else said he looked dangerous. That was all it took. Instead of waiting for a full investigation, a group of locals decided to handle it. They called themselves concerned citizens. In truth, they were angry, impatient, and convinced they already knew the truth. One night, they confronted Eric outside his rental home. Voices were raised, accusations were shouted. Eric denied everything, confused and frightened, but no one listened. Someone recorded the encounter on a phone. Someone else blocked the road. What happened next was later described in court as a complete breakdown of reason. Eric was detained by the group and held for hours while they demanded a confession. No police were called. No lawyer was present. By the time authorities finally arrived, alerted by a neighbor who heard shouting, Eric was badly injured. He died 2 days later in the hospital. The town expected closure. What they got instead was horror. Investigators quickly determined that Eric had nothing to do with Jonah's injuries. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed Jonah had been hurt in an unrelated accident involving an intoxicated driver who fled the scene. The truth came too late. The people who had claimed to be protecting their community were now facing serious charges. Interviews revealed how quickly suspicion had turned into certainty, and certainty into cruelty. Each person insisted they hadn't meant for things to go so far. Each claimed they were just trying to help, but help doesn't look like punishment without proof. The trial fractured Maple Ridge. Families took sides, long friendships ended. Some residents refused to testify against neighbors they had known their whole lives. Others were haunted by what silence had allowed. In court, the prosecutor spoke plainly. This was not justice, she said. This was fear pretending to be righteousness. Jonah, recovered and shaken, testified as well. He told the court he didn't even know Eric, that he wished he had spoken sooner. That he lived with guilt, knowing his silence had contributed to the worst outcome imaginable. Sentences were handed down. Lives changed forever. Today, Maple Ridge is quieter than it used to be. Not peaceful, careful. The town no longer boasts about handling things its own way. A small plaque now hangs outside the courthouse. It doesn't name anyone. It simply reads, "Justice without truth is not justice at all." And for those who live there, it serves as a reminder that when fear replaces law, innocence can become the first casualty. When Daniel Lowe moved to the town of Crestwood, no one paid much attention at first. People came and went all the time. Renters, seasonal workers, quiet drifters looking for a fresh start. Daniel fit that mold perfectly. He was polite, kept to himself, and rented a small basement apartment near the edge of town. He worked odd jobs, paid in cash, and never caused trouble. To most people, he was just another face. What no one realized was that Daniel had been there far longer than anyone thought. It started when a young woman named Hannah Reed went missing. She was 24, recently engaged, and known for jogging the same route every evening. One night, she never came home. Her phone was later found near a walking trail, carefully placed on a bench. The town searched for weeks. Posters went up, volunteers combed the woods, police followed every lead until they ran out of places to look. Hannah vanished without a trace. Years passed, new families moved in, old ones moved away. Her case slowly faded into memory, painful, unresolved, but quiet. Then a routine traffic stop reopened everything. A patrol officer pulled over Daniel Lowe for a broken headlight. While checking his ID, the officer noticed something strange. Daniel hesitated before giving his name, as if rehearsing it. His license listed an address that no longer X. A background check revealed something even stranger. Daniel Lowe had no verifiable history before arriving in Crestwood 8 years earlier. No school records, no employment trail, no prior addresses. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere. Detectives began digging deeper. Fingerprints were sent through national databases. The results came back with a match, not to Daniel Lowe, but to a man named Michael Turner, who had been questioned years earlier in connection with Hannah Reed's disappearance. Michael Turner had vanished shortly after that investigation stalled. The realization was chilling. The stranger who had quietly lived among them for years wasn't new at all. He had simply changed his name. Police obtained a warrant to search Daniel's apartment. Inside, they found notebooks filled with observations about the town, routines, schedules, names. Among them were older pages dated years back, including notes about Hannah. There were also items that once belonged to her. When confronted, Daniel didn't resist. He seemed almost relieved. He admitted that he had never truly left Crestwood because he believed staying close made him invisible. People stopped looking once time passed. Faces blurred, memories softened, and he blended in. He confessed that Hannah had trusted him, a familiar face from her jogging route. That trust had been enough. The trial stunned the community. Neighbors testified that Daniel had helped them carry groceries, watched their pets, fixed fences. Some had known him for years without ever knowing his real name. The judge later said, "This case proves that danger doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it stays, hides, and waits." Hannah's family finally received answers after nearly a decade of uncertainty. Though nothing could undo the loss, knowing the truth allowed them to mourn fully, something they'd been denied for too long. Today, Crestwood still looks peaceful. The streets are the same, the trails still wind through the trees, but people walk them differently now, because they learned a chilling truth the hard way. Sometimes the stranger isn't passing through. Sometimes, the stranger never left. To everyone in Riverbend, Paul and Marissa Hale looked like the perfect couple. They hosted backyard dinners, volunteered at school events, and never missed Sunday brunch downtown. Paul was soft-spoken and reliable. Marissa was warm, organized, and endlessly polite. People often said they were the kind of marriage everyone hopes for. No one imagined that behind their closed doors everything was built on a lie. The truth began to surface the night police received a call from Paul himself. His voice was calm, too calm. "My wife is missing," he said. "She didn't come home tonight." Officers arrived to find the house spotless. Marissa's purse sat on the kitchen counter. Her phone was charging beside the bed. Her car was still in the driveway. There were no signs of a struggle, no note, no explanation. Paul told them she had gone out for a walk after an argument and never returned. At first, investigators treated it as a standard missing person case. Friends were questioned. Search teams combed nearby trails. Flyers went up. Candlelight vigils were held, with Paul standing front and center, head bowed, eyes red. But small details didn't add up. Marissa's sister told police the couple had been fighting more than anyone realized. Quietly, secretly. She said Marissa had recently confided that she was afraid, not of violence but of what Paul was hiding. That statement changed everything. Detectives began re-examining Paul's background. What they found was unsettling. His employment history didn't match his resume. Dates overlapped, references didn't exist. And years before he met Mari, SSA, Paul had lived under a different last name. Under that name was a sealed police report from another state, involving the unexplained death of a former partner. No charges had ever been filed. When confronted, Paul claimed it was all a misunderstanding, a coincidence, bad records, but pressure was building. Investigators searched the couple's property more thoroughly. Behind the garage, beneath freshly disturbed soil, they found signs of recent digging. Ground-penetrating equipment confirmed something buried below. What they uncovered ended all doubt. Marissa had never gone for a walk. Confronted with the evidence, Paul's composure collapsed. The calm husband disappeared, replaced by someone bitter and resentful. He admitted that the marriage had been falling apart, that Marissa had discovered his past, the old name, the investigation, the lies. She said she was going to tell people, he said. I couldn't let that happen. The confession stunned the town. People struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the reality revealed in court. Friends replayed every interaction, every dinner, every smile, wondering what they had missed. At trial, prosecutors laid out a timeline of deception stretching back decades. The marriage itself, they argued, was built on falsehoods, and when the lies began to crack, violence followed. Paul was convicted and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. Marissa's family later released a statement thanking investigators for uncovering the truth, even though it came at an unbearable cost. Love should never be built on fear or secrets, her sister wrote. We hope her story reminds others to listen when something feels wrong. In Riverbend, the house where Paul and Marissa once lived now stands empty. The lights are off, the curtains drawn, and for those who pass by, it stands as a quiet warning. Some marriages aren't broken by time. They're built from lies from the very beginning. Everyone agreed on one fact. Lena Parker was last seen alive with her best friend. That truth would haunt the town of Ridgeway for years. Lena was 23, outgoing and full of plans. She worked at a small marketing firm, loved late-night coffee runs and trusted people easily, especially Mia Grant, her closest friend since high school. They had grown up together, shared secrets, heartbreaks, and dreams of leaving their small town one day. On the night Lena disappeared, she and Mia had dinner together at a local cafe. Multiple witnesses saw them laughing. A server remembered them clearly because they stayed until closing. Security footage later showed the two walking out side by side at 10:42 p.m. That was the last confirmed sighting of Lena Parker. Mia told police she dropped Lena off at her apartment and drove home. She said they hugged goodbye and talked about meeting again the next day. She appeared devastated, cooperative, and exhausted. For a while, investigators believed her. Lena's apartment showed no signs of struggle. Her phone was gone, her purse was missing, her bed untouched. It looked like she had simply vanished after getting home. Search teams scoured nearby areas. Volunteers handed out flyers. Candlelight vigils filled the park. Mia attended every one, crying openly, holding Lena's photo tightly to her chest. She was like my sister, she told reporters. I just want her back. But small details began to trouble investigators. Phone records showed Lena's phone had never reached her apartment. Its last signal came from a side road nearly 3 miles away, in the opposite direction. That road happened to be the same way Mia drove home. When asked about it, Mia said it must be a glitch. Technology wasn't perfect, she said. She had nothing to hide. Detectives looked deeper. Traffic hammer. As revealed, Mia's car passing the cafe, then turning not toward Lena's apartment, but toward the wooded outskirts of town. The timestamp matched the moment Lena's phone last pinged. When confronted, Mia said she must have taken a wrong turn. She laughed nervously and said she had a bad sense of direction, but investigators noticed something else. Her story kept changing. First, she said Lena was quiet during the drive. Later, she said they talked the whole way. She couldn't remember where they parked. She couldn't explain why her car had been professionally cleaned the following day. A search warrant was issued. In the trunk of Mia's car, forensic teams found traces that didn't belong there. Fibers matching Lena's jacket, and faint biological evidence that confirmed contact after the cafe. Under questioning, Mia finally broke. She admitted that Lena had confronted her during the drive. About a secret. About a betrayal involving someone they both trusted. The argument escalated. Voices were raised. Emotions exploded. I didn't mean for it to happen, Mia said through tears. I just lost control. She led investigators to a remote wooded area where Lena had been hidden for months. The discovery devastated the town. People struggled to understand how a lifelong friendship could end this way. Photos of the two smiling together flooded social media, now painful reminders of a bond that had turned fatal. At trial, prosecutors said the case wasn't about hatred, but about jealousy, fear, and betrayal, about how closeness can sometimes mask the deepest danger. Mia was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Lena's parents spoke softly during sentencing. The hardest part, her mother said, is knowing she trusted the person who hurt her most. Today, a small memorial stands near the cafe where the two friends were last seen together. Fresh flowers appear often, left by people who remember Lena's kindness. And in Ridgeway, one lesson lingers quietly in the air. Sometimes the last person to see you alive is the one you trusted the most. Maple Street was known for its calm evenings and familiar routines. Porch lights flicked on at dusk. Dogs barked once, then settled. Neighbors waved as they pulled into driveways. It was the kind of street where nothing ever made the news, until the night a scream shattered the quiet. At 9:46 p.m., several residents reported hearing a loud argument coming from the small white house at the corner, the home of Evelyn Hart, a 41-year-old divorcee who worked as a medical receptionist. Minutes later, there was a sharp sound, followed by silence. Police arrived to find Evelyn lying inside her living room. The front door was unlocked. No sign of forced entry, no sign of robbery, just a half-finished cup of tea on the table and a television still playing. Maple Street was stunned. Evelyn wasn't known to have enemies. She kept to herself, smiled politely, and spent most evenings reading or watching reruns. Neighbors described her as quiet but kind, the kind of person who returned lost mail and shoveled sidewalks without being asked. Investigators immediately focused on the argument reported by witnesses. Several neighbors claimed they heard a man's voice, angry, familiar, arguing with Evelyn shortly before everything went silent. But no one could clearly identify who it was. At first, suspicion fell on her ex-husband. The divorce had been tense, and old disputes were documented. He had motive, history, and a complicated relationship with her. But he also had an airtight alibi. Security footage placed him over an hour away at the time. With no forced entry, detectives believed Eve. Lynn had opened the door for someone she knew. That narrowed the list. They began knocking on doors along Maple Street, asking the same question, who saw her last? The answers slowly formed a pattern. Multiple neighbors mentioned Greg Turner, the man who lived directly across the street. He often helped Evelyn with small repairs, fixed a light, carried in groceries, checked on her when her car wouldn't start. He was always around, one neighbor said. Too helpful, maybe. Greg told police he hadn't seen Evelyn that night, said he'd gone to bed early. But investigators noticed something strange. His porch light, usually on all night, had been off during the estimated time of the crime. Security footage from a nearby home showed a shadowy figure crossing the street toward Evelyn's house just minutes before the argument was heard. The figure's height and build matched Greg. When questioned again, Greg changed his story. He now said he had gone over briefly to return a tool but left quickly after a short conversation. The inconsistencies added up. A search warrant was issued. Inside Greg's home, police found a pair of shoes with traces matching material from Evelyn's living room carpet. They also found a jacket with faint stains that testing later confirmed were linked to the scene. Confronted with the evidence, Greg finally admitted he had gone to see her that night. He said Evelyn had confronted him about something, about entering her home without permission weeks earlier while she was away. She had threatened to report him. According to Greg, panic took over. What started as a heated argument ended in irreversible violence. The revelation sent shockwaves through Maple Street. Neighbors struggled to accept that the man who waved every morning, who fixed fences and smiled politely, had been hiding something so dark. Many replayed small moments in their minds, the way he lingered, how he always seemed to know who was home. At trial, prosecutors described the case as a betrayal of trust made possible by familiarity. Evelyn hadn't opened the door to a stranger. She had opened it to someone she believed was safe. Greg was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Today, Maple Street looks the same. The trees still line the sidewalks. Children still ride bikes in the afternoon. But the sense of innocence is gone. Because everyone there learned the same hard truth. Sometimes the most dangerous door is the one you open without fear. When Thomas Keller reported his wife missing, he did everything right. He called the police within hours. He sounded shaken. He repeated the same story again and again without hesitation. He even asked investigators what he could do to help. To everyone watching, he looked like a worried husband trapped in a nightmare. But from the very beginning, something about his alibi didn't sit right. Laura Keller had last been seen leaving her office on a Friday evening. She texted a coworker that she was heading home. She never arrived. Her car was later found parked neatly in their driveway. Her purse was inside. Her phone was gone. Thomas told police he hadn't seen her that night. He claimed he'd stayed late at work, then stopped for takeout before coming home alone. He even provided receipts to prove it. On paper, his timeline was perfect, too perfect. Detectives reviewing surveillance footage from the restaurant noticed something odd. The timestamp on the receipt matched the camera footage, but Thomas wasn't alone. Another figure could be seen briefly reflected in the glass door behind him. At first, investigators assumed it was a stranger. Then they enhanced the footage. The reflection showed a woman with long hair, wearing a jacket identical to the one Laura was last seen wearing. That discovery cracked the sea open. Police revisited Thomas for a second interview. This time, the questions were sharper, more specific. They asked why Laura's phone had last pinged near a quiet service road not far from their home. They asked why neighbors heard raised voices coming from the Keller house earlier that evening. Thomas stuck to his story. "I wasn't there," he said. "I couldn't have been." But his alibi began to unravel piece by piece. License plate readers showed his car never actually went to the restaurant he claimed. The receipt time had been altered. Investigators later learned he'd taken it from a trash bin outside the business the next day. Even more damaging was data recovered from Laura's smartwatch. It recorded elevated heart rate patterns consistent with stress inside the house during the exact time Thomas claimed to be out. When confronted with this evidence, Thomas finally changed his story. He admitted that Laura had come home earlier than expected. They argued about finances, about control, about things she'd been planning in secret. She had told him she was thinking about leaving. According to Thomas, the argument escalated. Words turned cruel, tempers flared, and then, in a moment, he said he never intended. Everything went wrong. He confessed to staging the alibi afterward, believing that if he looked cooperative enough, no one would question him. He was wrong. Search teams later recovered Laura's remains in a wooded area several miles from their home, a place Thomas had visited multiple times before, according to his phone records. The case sent shockwaves through the community. Friends who once admired the couple struggled to reconcile the public image with the truth revealed in court. At sentencing, the judge addressed Thomas directly. "You didn't just take a life," she said. "You tried to erase it with a story." Thomas was sentenced to life in prison. Laura's family later released a statement saying they hoped others would recognize the warning signs hidden beneath polished appearances. Because sometimes the most convincing lies aren't told to strangers. They're told to everyone who wants to believe them. And sometimes all it takes to reveal the truth is one alibi that doesn't quite hold together. When Robert Hayes moved into the quiet neighborhood of Willow Park, everyone welcomed him. He was polite, soft-spoken, and always eager to help. He mowed lawns for elderly neighbors, fixed broken fences, and waved every morning like clockwork. People called him the good one on the block. Parents felt safe letting their kids ride bikes past his house. No one knew much about his past, but no one thought to ask. That changed the night Emily Carter disappeared. Emily was 27, a graduate student who had recently moved into a rental 2 doors down from Robert. She was friendly but private, the kind of person who smiled politely and kept to herself. On the evening she vanished, she had been seen carrying groceries inside around 8:30 p.m. By morning, her car was still parked outside. Her phone was inside the house. Her door was unlocked. Police were called immediately. At first, investigators believed Emily might have gone for a walk or met someone she knew, but her family insisted that wasn't like her. She never left without her phone. She never failed to check in. Officers began knocking on doors. Robert was one of the first neighbors to speak with them. He seemed genuinely concerned. He told police he'd heard nothing unusual and had gone to bed early. He even offered to help search the area. But during those early interviews, detectives noticed something subtle. Robert talked a lot, almost too much. He volunteered details no one asked for. He described Emily's schedule, her habits, and even the layout of her home with surprising accuracy. When asked how he knew so much, he smiled and said, "You pick things up when you live close." As the investigation continued, police uncovered a troubling detail. Robert had lived in 3 different states over the past 15 years, often leaving suddenly. Each move followed vague personal issues. No criminal record appeared at first glance, but a deeper background check told a different story. In another state, under a slightly different name, Robert had once been questioned in connection with a violent assault years earlier. The case had fallen apart due to lack of evidence. He was never charged. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Detectives returned to Willow Park with a warrant. Inside Robert's home, they found items that didn't belong to him. A scarf identified as Emily's, a key from her keychain, and notes describing neighbors' routines, dates, times, observations. Behind a locked door in the basement, they found evidence that confirmed their worst fears. When confronted, Robert finally stopped pretending. He admitted he had watched Emily for weeks. He said she was kind and safe, and that he only wanted to talk. When she resisted, things spiraled out of control. The confession sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Neighbors struggled to reconcile the helpful man they trusted with the truth. Parents replayed every interaction, every wave, every smile, every favor. At trial, prosecutors revealed Robert's long history of violence, always just out of reach of consequences, always hidden behind relocation and charm. This wasn't a moment, the prosecutor said. It was a pattern. Robert was sentenced to life in prison. Emily's family later released a statement thanking investigators for uncovering the truth and urging communities to take concerns seriously, even when the person involved seems kind. Today, Willow Park looks peaceful again. But the people who live there know something they didn't before. Sometimes the most dangerous pasts are the ones carefully buried beneath friendliness. And sometimes, the neighbor everyone trusts is the one they should have feared the most. For years, people in the town of Ashford told themselves the same thing. It's probably nothing. When Lisa Moreno first complained, no one took her seriously. She said someone was watching her, following her, leaving her uneasy notes that disappeared by morning. Police filed a short report and told her to be careful. Neighbors said she was anxious, dramatic, overreacting. Nothing bad ever happens here, they said. 6 months later, Lisa was dead. She was found in her apartment after she failed to show up for work. The door was unlocked. The lights were on. Everything looked ordinary, too ordinary. There were no signs of forced entry and no clear evidence of a struggle. Police initially ruled it a tragic accident, but one detective wasn't convinced. Detective Mara Collins noticed something subtle. Lisa's calendar was filled with notes documenting incidents, dates, times, descriptions. Man outside window, footsteps again. Someone tried my door. Each entry ended the same way, reported. No action taken. The reports had been logged but never followed up. Digging deeper, Collins found that multiple residents in Lisa's apartment complex had made similar complaints over the years. Someone lurking, someone watching, someone knocking late at night and disappearing. None of the reports had been connected, because no one had ever been hurt before. The detective reopened the case quietly, and began reviewing old security footage from nearby buildings. Most of it had been overwritten, but one hard drive still contained archived data. On it, she saw a man lingering near Lisa's building late at night. Always wearing a cap, always keeping his face low. He appeared again and again over several months. The footage showed him entering the building just days before Lisa died. Detective Collins traced access logs and maintenance records. One name kept appearing: Evan Rourke, a contract maintenance worker who had access to multiple apartment complexes across the area. Rourke had been mentioned in past complaints, not as a suspect but as someone seen around. Each time the reports were closed as unfounded. When police questioned him, he denied everything. Said he was just doing his job. Said residents were paranoid, but evidence began to stack up. Keycard logs showed entries into Lisa's building during hours he wasn't scheduled to work. His phone location placed him nearby on the night she died. And in his vehicle, investigators found notebooks filled with names, addresses, and observations, many belonging to residents who had previously reported feeling watched. Lisa's name was circled. Confronted with the evidence, Rourke finally confessed. He admitted he had been watching residents for years. learning their routines, entering apartments when he thought no one was home. He said he never expected things to go that far. But they did. The investigation revealed that Lisa had tried repeatedly to get help and had been ignored every time. Her case became a turning point. The department publicly acknowledged its failure. Policies changed, complaint systems were reworked, pattern-based reports were taken seriously, officers were retrained to recognize stalking behavior before it escalated. At sentencing, the judge addressed the courtroom directly. "Teach. Is crime did not happen in silence," she said. "It happened in plain sight, and was ignored." Lisa's family later released a statement asking people to listen when someone says they feel unsafe. "Believe them," they wrote. Before it's too late. In Ashford, a small plaque now hangs in the municipal building lobby. It bears no name, only a sentence. Some crimes happen not because no one knew, but because no one listened. For nearly 4 years, the disappearance of Kevin Morales remained a mystery with no clear direction. Kevin was 32, recently engaged, and known for his strict routines. Every morning he left his apartment at 7:10 a.m., stopped for coffee, and walked the same route to work. When he failed to show up one Monday, coworkers assumed he was sick. By noon, his fiancée was calling police. Kevin's apartment showed no signs of trouble. His wallet and phone were gone. His keys were missing. His car remained parked outside. It looked like he had simply walked away from his life. Investigators searched nearby parks, rivers, and abandoned buildings. Flyers went up. Tips came in, then slowly faded. Months passed. Then years. The case went cold. What no one realized was that the answer had been sitting quietly on a forgotten hard drive the entire time. 4 years later, a local business upgraded its security system. During the transfer of old footage, a technician noticed corrupted files dated around the time Kevin vanished. Curious, he attempted recovery. One clip loaded. It showed a narrow side street 2 blocks from Kevin's apartment. The footage was grainy, partially obstructed, but clear enough to make out shapes. At 7:14 a.m., Kevin appeared on screen, walking as usual. Then something unexpected happened. A car slowly pulled alongside him. The driver's window lowered. Kevin stopped walking. He leaned slightly toward the car as if recognizing the person inside. Then he stepped closer. The car door opened. Kevin disappeared from view. The timestamp continued running. The car pulled away seconds later. The technician immediately contacted police. Detectives reopened the case, stunned. The vehicle's make and partial license plate were barely visible, but it was enough to narrow possibilities. Cross-referencing traffic cameras from nearby intersections allowed them to reconstruct the route. The car had passed through 3 intersections within minutes, and all 3 cameras caught it. The driver was finally visible. It was someone investigators recognized instantly. Daniel Reeves, Kevin's former co-worker. Years earlier, Kevin had reported Daniel for harassment at work. The complaint had resulted in Daniel's dismissal. At the time, Daniel had insisted Kevin was lying and ruined his life. Police had interviewed him briefly back then, but with no evidence, nothing came of it. Now, everything changed. Investigators obtained a warrant to search Daniel's property. In a shed behind his home, they found items that belonged to Kevin, including a jacket his fiancée had reported missing. Under the concrete floor of the shed, ground-penetrating scans revealed disturbed earth. What they found ended all doubt. Confronted with the evidence, Daniel confessed. He admitted that he had followed Kevin for weeks, blaming him for his job loss, his financial collapse, and his isolation. When he saw Kevin walking that morning, he seized the opportunity. He believed no one would ever know. The recovered footage became the key piece of evidence. The moment the truth had been captured and forgotten. At trial, prosecutors played the video in court. The room went silent as jurors watched Kevin step toward the car, unaware it would be his last moment of freedom. Daniel was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Kevin's family later released a statement thanking the technician who refused to ignore what he found. If he hadn't looked twice, they said, we might never have known what happened. The case became a powerful reminder within law enforcement. Sometimes the truth isn't hidden, it's recorded, waiting patiently for someone to finally press play. When Natalie Brooks failed to show up for work on a Monday morning, no one panicked at first. She was 28, independent, and known for taking spontaneous weekend trips. Her coworkers assumed she had taken a day off. Her manager even joked that she probably just needed a break. But by Tuesday, concern began to grow. Natalie's phone went straight to voicemail. Her apartment lights stayed off. Her car remained parked in its usual spot, untouched. When her sister stopped by to check on her, she found the door locked and everything inside perfectly normal. Too normal. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter. Her laptop was open on the table. A half-written grocery list lay beside it. Natalie had vanished without a trace. Police launched a missing person investigation, but quickly ran into a wall. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no suspicious messages, no recent conflicts. Friends described Natalie as cautious and responsible. She wouldn't just disappear, her sister said. That's not who she was. The only unusual detail came from a neighbor who mentioned seeing Natalie talking to someone in the hallway the night before she vanished. The neighbor couldn't describe the person clearly, only that it was a man and the conversation seemed calm. Security cameras in the building should have provided answers. But when investigators reviewed the footage, they found something strange. The cameras had gone offline for exactly 11 minutes that night. Only 11? Long enough for someone to enter and leave. Technicians initially believed it was a coincidence, a brief system error. But when they examined the system logs, they found evidence of manual interference. Someone with access knowledge had disabled the feed. That narrowed the suspect pool dramatically. Maintenance staff were interviewed. Contractors were checked. Backgrounds reviewed. One name stood out, Aaron Pike, a former IT technician who had helped install the building's camera system years earlier. He no longer worked there, but his access credentials had never been fully removed. Aaron had also lived in the building once, directly across the hall from Natalie. When questioned, he claimed he barely remembered her, said he hadn't been inside the building in months. But phone records told a different story. His device had connected to a nearby cell tower the same night Natalie vanished. Investigators obtained a warrant to search his storage unit. Inside, they found electronics, cables, and hard drives, along with a folder labeled simply N. On one of the drives were saved camera feeds. Not just from the building, but from inside it, including footage of Natalie's hallway. The video showed her opening her door that night, speaking briefly with someone off camera. She stepped into the hall willingly. She did not appear afraid. That was the last image of her ever recorded. Faced with the evidence, Aaron eventually confessed. He admitted he had been watching Natalie for months, exploiting his technical access to observe her routines. He told investigators he believed they had a connection, even though they had barely spoken. When she confronted him that night, asking why he was near her door, panic set in. What followed, he said, was never supposed to happen. Search teams later recovered evidence that confirmed Natalie's fate in a remote area outside the city. The case shook the community deeply. People realized that the danger hadn't come from a stranger breaking in, but from someone who already had access, someone trusted by the system itself. At sentencing, the judge spoke bluntly. This crime was made possible by access without accountability. Natalie's family later advocated for stronger security oversight and background checks for building access systems. Her sister said in a statement, "She didn't vanish, she was taken, and she deserves to be remembered for who she was, not for how she disappeared." The case became known as one of the most unsettling in the city's history, because for years the mystery wasn't unsolved. Due to lack of evidence. It was unsolved because the person responsible already had the keys. For nearly a decade, detectives referred to it as the cleanest disappearance they had ever seen. No blood, no witnesses, no forced entry, no digital trail. When Aaron Feldman vanished, it was as if he had stepped out of his life and erased himself on the way out. Aaron was 35, meticulous and methodical. He worked in logistics, loved routine, and documented everything. He never missed work, never traveled without notice, and never ignored messages. That's why alarm bells rang when he failed to show up on a Monday morning. His apartment was pristine. His laptop sat closed on the desk. His phone was gone. His car was still parked in its assigned space. The door was locked from the outside. Police searched for weeks. They interviewed coworkers, neighbors, and family. Nothing surfaced. There were no signs of conflict, no suspicious relationships, no history of trouble. The case slowly went cold. Investigators quietly labeled it what they hated most: unexplainable. Years passed. Then, during a routine audit of old digital records, a junior analyst noticed something strange in Aaron's archived email metadata. One outgoing message, sent the night before he vanished, showed an IP conflict. It appeared to have been sent from 2 locations at once. That shouldn't have been possible. The message itself was harmless, a short work update sent to a supervisor. But the metadata suggested it had been routed through another device before being delivered. The analyst flagged it. That single detail reopened the entire case. Digital forensics teams dug deeper and discovered the email had been forwarded through a private relay server. One registered under a fake name, but paid for with a credit card belonging to Marcus Hale, a former co-worker. Marcus had worked closely with Aaron years earlier. They were known to clash often. After a heated dispute, Marcus had been fired. At the time, he blamed Aaron for reporting him. Police interviewed Marcus again. He appeared cooperative, confident, almost amused. He said he hadn't spoken to Aaron in years, claimed he had moved on. But investigators had learned something critical over time: criminals often leave patterns, not fingerprints. They reviewed Marcus's digital history and found something chilling. He had spent years researching anonymization tools, private servers, and data erasure methods. He frequented forums discussing how to disappear cleanly and how to avoid digital footprints. Then came the mistake. One of the old servers Marcus used automatically logged a system update years later. During that update, it briefly reconnected to a long-forgotten cloud backup, one that contained fragments of deleted files. Among them was a location log, a single coordinate. Search teams were dispatched to the rural site listed in the data. It was an isolated stretch of land once used as a temporary storage area during construction years earlier. Beneath a poured concrete slab, investigators found evidence that confirmed Aaron's fate. Marcus was arrested soon after. Faced with the technical trail he believed erased forever, he finally spoke. He admitted he had spent years planning the perfect crime. He believed intelligence and preparation could replace violence, that careful design could eliminate consequences. His mistake was believing technology forgets. In court, prosecutors emphasized how one overlooked digital detail had unraveled everything. A perfect crime doesn't fail because of emotion, the prosecutor said. It fails because systems remember. Marcus was sentenced to life in prison. Aaron's family, after years of uncertainty, finally had answers. They later said something that stayed with envy. Investigators, he didn't vanish. He was erased, and then found again by a single mistake. The case became a lesson taught in digital forensics courses across the country. No matter how carefully a crime is planned, perfection only lasts until someone looks close enough. The letter was discovered by accident. It sat at the bottom of an evidence box, wedged between old photographs and a folded map, unnoticed for years. Yellowed with age, sealed but never mailed, it would become the most disturbing piece of evidence in a case many believed was already finished. The case belonged to Rachel Vaughn, a 34-year-old teacher who disappeared one fall evening after staying late at school to grade papers. Her car was found in the parking lot. Her classroom lights were still on. Her bag sat neatly on her desk. She was never seen again. After months of investigation, police arrested Caleb Morris, a former maintenance worker at the school. Surveillance had placed him on campus that night, and forensic evidence eventually tied him to the scene. He denied everything, but the jury convicted him based on circumstantial evidence. The town believed the story was over, but it wasn't. 5 years after Caleb's arrest, a clerk assigned to digitize old case files opened a sealed envelope marked personal. Do not log. Inside was a handwritten letter dated 2 days after Rachel vanished. The handwriting matched Caleb's. The letter had never been logged, never submitted, never reviewed, and its contents changed everything. It wasn't a confession. It was a message addressed to Rachel. I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear I never wanted to hurt you. You were supposed to listen. You were supposed to understand. The wording disturbed investigators immediately. Caleb had always claimed he never spoke to Rachel that night, that he had never been alone with her. But the letter suggested something else entirely. It went on, "They won't listen to me. They think I'm a monster. Maybe that's what I am now. But I need you to know I didn't plan this. I just lost control." The letter ended without a signature. Detectives reopened the case and began combing through old evidence with fresh eyes. They realized something troubling. The original investigation had focused heavily on physical evidence, but very little attention had been paid to motive or prior contact. When they reviewed school records, they found several unreported maintenance requests filed by Rachel in the months before her disappearance. Each had been assigned to Caleb. Further interviews with coworkers revealed something else. Rachel had once complained to a colleague that a maintenance worker made her uncomfortable, but said she didn't want to cause trouble. That detail had never made it into the original report. Investigators also uncovered deleted emails recovered from an old backup server. Messages from Caleb to Rachel that were never answered. Polite at first, then increasingly personal, then unsettling. The letter suddenly made sense. Confronted with the newly uncovered evidence, Caleb broke his silence. He admitted that the night Rachel disappeared, she had confronted him about the messages and told him she planned to report him. He claimed panic took over. What he had insisted for years was a false conviction was, in reality, a carefully constructed lie. The letter, written in a moment of guilt, had nearly exposed him long before. At a new hearing, prosecutors presented the full story. The judge described the letter as the voice of truth trying to surface. Caleb received an updated sentence reflecting the full scope of his crime. Rachel's family finally learned what had happened in her final hours. Her sister later said, "That letter was her voice speaking through time. It refused to stay." Buried. The case became a reminder to investigators nationwide. Evidence doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits, folded quietly in a box, until someone finally chooses to read it. For generations, the Caldwell family was respected in the town of Briarwood. They owned land, businesses, and history. Their name was carved into plaques, buildings, and memories. People spoke of them with quiet admiration. Old money, good people, strong values. No one imagined that the darkest crime in the town's history would come from inside that family. It began with the death of Evan Caldwell, age 26. Evan was found at the bottom of a ravine just outside town. His car was parked neatly at the overlook above, keys still in the ignition. At first glance it looked like a tragic accident, maybe a fall, maybe a moment of despair, but the autopsy told a different story. Evan had been injured before he went over the edge. Police reopened the case as a homicide. The problem was motive. Evan was well-liked, successful, and had no known enemies. He worked at the family's real estate office and lived in a renovated guest house on the Caldwell estate. He had money, connections, and a future. Or so everyone thought. Detectives began interviewing family members. His parents were grieving but composed. His older brother Thomas spoke carefully and avoided eye contact. His aunt insisted Evan had been troubled lately and hinted at depression. But one person told a different story. Evan's cousin Lily came forward quietly and asked to speak off the record. She told investigators that Evan had recently uncovered something disturbing, something the family had kept buried for decades. According to Lily, Evan had been digging through old property documents while helping reorganize family records. What he found didn't match the official history. Years earlier, a large section of land, at Maid, the Caldwell fortune had belonged to another family. That family had vanished from records after a suspicious house fire. No deaths were officially recorded. No investigation ever followed. Evan believed the land had been taken illegally. And worse, he believed the family knew. Detectives followed the paper trail. Deeds had been altered, dates didn't line up, signatures were inconsistent. It appeared that documents had been quietly rewritten decades earlier. When confronted, Evan's father denied everything, said the past was complicated and best left alone. Family disagreements, he claimed, were common, but phone records showed heated calls between Evan and several relatives in the days before his death. One voicemail, recovered from Evan's cloud account, changed everything. "I can't pretend anymore," Evan said in the recording. "If you don't tell the truth, I will." The message was sent to his brother Thomas. Under renewed pressure, Thomas finally broke. He admitted that Evan had confronted the family after uncovering the truth. The Caldwell fortune was built on land seized through intimidation. and falsified records decades earlier. When Evan threatened to go public, panic spread. According to Thomas, the confrontation on the night of Evan's death was supposed to be a talk. An argument broke out near the Overlook. Tempers flared. Someone shoved Evan. No one meant for him to fall. But once it happened, the family chose to protect itself. They staged the scene. They agreed on a story. They buried the truth, just as it had been buried before. The revelation stunned the town. People who had trusted the Caldwell name for generations struggled to accept that respectability had hidden something so dark. Long suppressed records were reopened. The original land theft was finally acknowledged. Charges followed. At sentencing, the judge addressed the courtroom. His was not just a crime of violence, he said. It was a crime of silence, passed down like an inheritance. Evan's name was cleared. His death was officially ruled a homicide. A memorial now stands near the Overlook where he died. It bears a simple inscription chosen by Lily. Truth survives what secrets destroy. And in Briarwood, people learned a painful lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't kept by strangers. They're protected by families. Generation after generation, for almost 10 years, the murder of Olivia Grant sat quietly in the cold case archive, marked with a red tag that read "No cooperative witnesses." Olivia was 25, a nursing student with a gentle voice and a habit of helping everyone before herself. She lived alone in a small apartment near downtown and worked long evening shifts at the hospital. One night, she never made it home. Her body was discovered the next morning in a narrow alley, just 2 blocks from her building. There were no signs of robbery. Her phone was missing. No one had called for help, and despite the location, no witnesses came forward. Police canvassed the area repeatedly. Dozens of people lived or worked nearby. Someone had to have seen something. But everyone said the same thing. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. I don't know anything. The case went cold within months. What investigators didn't know was that someone had seen everything. Her name was Marisol Vega. She lived in an apartment overlooking the alley and had been awake that night, studying for exams. Through her window, she saw Olivia walking home. Moments later, she saw a man step out from the shadows and confront her. Marisol watched as the argument escalated. She watched as Olivia tried to step away. She watched the moment everything went wrong. And then she did something she would regret for years. She closed her blind and stayed silent. Marisol was terrified. The man wasn't a stranger to her. He was someone she recognized. Someone known in the neighborhood. Someone with a reputation for violence and connections that made people afraid to cross him. She told herself the police would figure it out. She told herself staying quiet was safer. Years passed. The guilt did not. Every anniversary of Olivia's death brought the same nightmares. Every news article reopened the wound. Marisol avoided mirrors, avoided conversations, avoided the alley altogether. Then one evening, nearly a decade later, she saw his face again. The man she had watched that night was being arrested on the news for an unrelated assault. His name was Victor Hale. Something inside her broke. The next morning, Marisol walked into the police station and asked to speak to a detective. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to sit down. I saw what happened to Olivia, she said. I should have said something before. Detectives listened carefully as she gave a detailed account. The argument, the clothing, the exact movements, the direction he fled. Her description matched evidence they had never been able to explain. Investigators reopened the case immediately. They pulled old surveillance footage, re-examined phone records, and reviewed prior tips involving Victor Hale. Patterns emerged. He had been near the scene that night. His phone had gone dark for nearly an hour. He had lied about his whereabouts. When confronted with Marisol's testimony, Victor denied everything at first, but the renewed investigation uncovered more. Old messages, witness intimidation complaints, and prior violent behavior that had never been connected. The case went to trial. Marisol took the stand, trembling but determined. The courtroom was silent as she described what she had seen all those years ago. I was scared, she said through tears. But staying quiet didn't protect anyone. It just let him hurt someone else. Her testimony became the turning point. Victor was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. After the verdict, Olivia's family hugged Marisol. There was no anger, only gratitude. Her courage, even delayed, had finally brought justice. Later, Marisol spoke publicly for the first time. "I thought silence would keep me safe," she said. But silence only protected the person who did it. The case became a powerful example used in victim advocacy training across the state. Because sometimes the truth isn't missing, it's waiting. Behind fear, behind guilt, behind someone who just needs the courage to finally speak. Before the murder, the town of Red Hollow was known for two things: tradition and loyalty. People there grew up together, married each other, and defended one another fiercely. Outsiders often joked that Red Hollow didn't just have neighbors, it had sides, and once you were on one, you stayed there. That loyalty would become its greatest weakness. The crime happened on a cold November night. Caleb Monroe, a 34-year-old mechanic, was found dead behind his workshop, lying near the back alley where he often took smoke breaks. There were signs of a struggle, but no weapon, no witnesses, and no clear motive. At first, police believed it was a robbery gone wrong, but nothing had been taken. Caleb's wallet was still in his pocket, his tools were untouched, his truck sat parked where he always left it. Almost immediately, suspicion divided the town. One side blamed outsiders, people from nearby cities who didn't belong. The other side quietly pointed fingers inward, whispering that Caleb had enemies closer than anyone wanted to admit. Caleb had been outspoken. He questioned local decisions. He challenged long-standing business deals. And most dangerously, he had recently accused a powerful local family of skimming money from a community project. That family, the Harpers, had deep roots in Red Hollow. Generations of influence, friends in city offices, supporters everywhere. When police questioned them, doors closed, statements were rehearsed, timelines matched too neatly, no one slipped, and slowly the investigation stalled. Rumors began to circulate that law enforcement was going easy on certain people. Others insisted the police were being fair, and that Caleb had simply crossed the wrong strangers. The town split in two. At diners, conversations stopped when certain people walked in. Longtime friendships fractured. Church pews had empty spaces where families once sat together. Then, 2 years later, a break came from an unexpected place. A teenager named Noah Harper, a distant relative of the influential family, walked into a neighboring county sheriff's office late one night. He looked shaken, exhausted, and guilty. He told investigators he couldn't live with it anymore. Noah said that on the night Caleb died, a heated confrontation had taken place behind the workshop. Several people were there. Not strangers, but locals. The argument had started over money and threats to expose corruption. According to Noah, things escalated. Voices rose. Someone shoved Caleb. He fell, struck his head, and didn't get back up. Panic followed. Instead of calling for help, those present made a decision: protect the family name at all costs. They agreed on a story. They pressured others to stay silent. And for 2 years the town played its part. Investigators reopened the case immediately. Phone records, location data, and old witness statements were re-examined. Once the first crack appeared, more followed. People who had been afraid to speak finally came forward. One by one the truth surfaced. The case went to trial and tore Red Hollow apart. Some residents refused to believe the verdict, insisting it was a setup. Others felt vindicated that the truth was finally exposed. Friendships ended, businesses closed, families moved away. The judge, in his sentencing statement, said, "This was not just a crime committed by individuals, it was a crime protected by silence." Caleb's family finally received justice, but not peace. Even today, Red Hollow carries the weight of what happened. The town still exists. The buildings still stand. But trust, once broken, never fully returned, and people there learned a painful lesson: when loyalty matters more than truth, justice becomes impossible, and a whole town can become complicit. To the people of Greenfield, Arthur Collins was the definition of respectability. He coached youth baseball, donated to local charities, sat in the front row at town meetings. When people spoke about good men, his name came up often. Trusted, reliable, safe, no one questioned him. That's why the discovery shocked everyone. It began when Melissa Ward, a 29-year-old social worker, failed to return home one evening. She had spent the afternoon visiting clients and was last seen leaving a community center just before sunset. Her car was later found parked neatly on a side street only a few blocks away. The keys were still in the ignition. Her phone was missing. Police initially believed she may have met someone she knew. There were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses, and no immediate suspects. The case quickly grew cold. Months passed. Then a year. Greenfield moved on. But one detective never did. Detective Laura Hensley kept returning to a single detail. Several residents reported seeing Melissa speaking to an older, well-dressed man near the community center shortly before she disappeared. The description was vague, but the behavior stood out. Calm, familiar, unthreatening. Someone she trusted. Hensley began reviewing visitor logs, volunteer sign-in sheets, and event photos from that day. One face appeared again and again. Arthur Collins. He had volunteered at the community center for years. He mentored teens, helped with paperwork, fixed things when they broke. No one ever questioned his presence. When questioned, Arthur was polite and cooperative. He said he remembered seeing Melissa but insisted it was brief and harmless. He claimed he left shortly after. But investigators noticed something odd. Arthur's timeline had gaps, long unexplained stretches of time that evening. And his phone records showed activity near Melissa's last known location hours after he claimed to be home. A deeper background check revealed something disturbing. Decades earlier, in another state, Arthur had been questioned in connection with a missing woman. No charges were filed. The case had faded. He moved soon after. The pattern was subtle but undeniable. Police obtained a warrant to search a storage unit rented under Arthur's name. Inside were boxes labeled with dates. Carefully organized, methodical. One box contained items that belonged to Melissa. The room went silent. Further searches uncovered notebooks filled with observations, names, routines, schedules, pages written over many years. Some entries were crossed out, others circled. Arthur was arrested that afternoon. At first he denied everything, claimed he was being framed, said he had only tried to help people. But confronted with the evidence, the mask finally slipped. He admitted he lived a second life, one no one was supposed to see. He said he liked being trusted, being overlooked, being invited in. Melissa, he claimed, had started asking questions. She had noticed inconsistencies. She planned to report him. That, he said, was when things went wrong. The trial stunned Greenfield. People who had known Arthur for decades struggled to reconcile the gentle volunteer with the man described in court. Some refused to believe it even as evidence mounted. But the verdict was clear. Arthur Collins was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Afterward, investigators reopened several cold cases connected to his past. Some were officially linked to him, others remain under review. Melissa's family later released a statement asking people not to remember her only for what happened to her, but for her kindness and dedication to helping others. In Greenfield, the community center still stands, but Arthur's name has been removed from every plaque, every donor list, every photograph, and the town learned a truth that still unsettles them. Sometimes the most dangerous lives are hidden behind the most respectable faces. For years, the disappearance of Jordan Wells was spoken about in whispers. He was 29, newly married, and known as dependable, the kind of person who showed up early and stayed late. One night, after leaving a small gathering at a friend's house, he never made it home. His car was found parked neatly along the curb a few blocks away, locked, with his phone inside. There were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses, no clear motive. Police investigated thoroughly at first, then slowly less and less. Eventually, Jordan's case joined the long list of unsolved disappearances that people talked about only when reminded. But the truth had never gone far. It had been sitting quietly in the same town all along. 5 years later, during a routine arrest for an unrelated assault, a man named Ethan Rowe was brought into custody. He was intoxicated, angry, and talking too much. While sitting in the holding room, he suddenly said something that made the officer stop writing. "You know," he muttered, "I'm not the worst thing that ever happened in this town. Not even close." When asked what he meant, Ethan laughed bitterly. "Ask about Jordan Wells," he said. "Ask who really knows what happened that night." The comment was logged, but at first it went nowhere. Still, a detective reviewing cold cases noticed something strange. Ethan had lived only 2 streets away from where Jordan's car was found, and he had never been interviewed back then. When detectives brought him in again, this time sober, Ethan tried to backtrack. He said he was just talking nonsense, but his story shifted too easily. Under pressure, he finally admitted that he had been with Jordan that night, along with 2 other people. According to Ethan, Jordan had confronted them about something he had recently discovered, a small but ongoing theft operation involving stolen tools and resale through local contacts. It wasn't a huge crime, but it involved people who didn't want attention. The confrontation grew heated. Voices rose. Someone shoved Jordan. He fell hard and didn't get back up. Panic followed. No one called for help. Instead, they made a decision that would haunt them for years. They moved his body, staged the car, and agreed to silence. Each person went back to their life pretending nothing had happened. For 5 years it worked. But guilt has a way of leaking out. Once Ethan spoke, detectives began pulling phone records, old messages, and location data that hadn't been available years earlier. The evidence lined up. The story held. The other 2 men were arrested within weeks. When the news broke, the town reacted with disbelief. These weren't outsiders or criminals. They were familiar faces, people seen at barbecues, school events, and town meetings. Neighbors struggled to reconcile the truth with what they thought they knew. In court, prosecutors described the case as a crime sustained by silence. No elaborate planning, no mastermind, just fear, loyalty, and a terrible decision to protect themselves. Jordan's wife, now years older and still grieving, spoke at sentencing. "I waited 5 years to know what happened to my husband," she said. 5 years of wondering if he was scared or alone. The truth doesn't fix that, but it finally lets me breathe. All 3 men were convicted. The night the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. Outside, reporters asked how such a thing could stay hidden so long. One detective answered quietly, "Because the truth didn't disappear. It was just waiting for someone to finally say it out loud." For nearly 8 years, the murder of Claire Donovan was considered unsolvable. She was 31, a graphic designer with a quiet life and a small circle of friends. One evening, she left her apartment to take out the trash and never came back. Her keys were later found near the dumpster. Her phone was gone. No witnesses came forward. Police searched dumpsters, alleys, rooftops, everything. But there was no sign of a struggle and no clear suspect. The case slowly faded into the background. What no one realized was that the most important evidence had been sitting in the police evidence room the entire time. It was labeled simply, Bag 417, Miscellaneous. Inside the bag were items collected near the scene: debris, fibers, a broken bracelet, and a small metal keychain shaped like a compass. At the time, it had been dismissed as unimportant. Years later, a new cold case detective, Renee Alvarez, began reviewing older files as part of a department audit. She noticed the vague label and pulled the bag for review. One item caught her attention immediately: the compass keychain. It wasn't damaged, it wasn't dirty, and it looked personal. She checked Claire's missing person photos. None showed the keychain. But when she searched through Claire's social media, she found something striking. A photo from months earlier of Claire at a street fair holding a drink. Hanging from her bag was the same small compass charm. The keychain had been hers, but it hadn't been found with her belongings, which meant it had been removed and dropped later. Detective Alvarez reopened the scene analysis and overlaid old maps with updated surveillance data. One camera, long dismissed due to poor quality, captured a blurry figure walking quickly away from the alley that night. Something small glinted in their hand. The timestamp matched the estimated time Claire vanished. Using modern enhancement tools, technicians clarified the image just enough to reveal a jacket logo. That logo belonged to a local delivery company. Records showed only 3 employees were working in the area that night. One of them was Evan Brooks, a delivery driver who had been questioned briefly years earlier and cleared. Alvarez looked deeper. Evan's phone records placed him near the alley that night, closer than he had admitted. His delivery log showed an unexplained 22-minute gap, and he had abruptly quit his job less than a week later. When detectives searched his old apartment, now vacant, they found something hidden behind a loose baseboard. A small collection of items. Among them was a matching compass keychain. Broken. When confronted, Evan denied everything at first, but when shown the evidence, he grew quiet. Then emotional. Then he asked for a lawyer. Eventually, he confessed. He admitted he had encountered Claire while making a delivery. He said she startled him when she spoke, that an argument followed, and things got out of control. In panic, he fled, dropping the keychain without realizing it. The detail that had been overlooked for years became the piece that unraveled everything. At trial, prosecutors held up the small metal charm. "This was never hidden," one of them said. "It W. As right there. Waiting to be seen." Evan was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Claire's family finally received answers after nearly a decade of waiting. Her mother later said, "We always believed the truth was still somewhere close. We just didn't know how close." The case became a training example for investigators nationwide, because sometimes justice isn't delayed by lack of evidence, but by evidence no one thought to look at twice. For 15 years, the file labeled Harris, Melanie, closed sat untouched in the records room. Melanie Harris had been 27 when she died. Her body was found at the bottom of a ravine outside the city limits, her car abandoned miles away. The official ruling was accidental death, a tragic fall after her vehicle broke down. At the time, the conclusion seemed reasonable. There were no witnesses, no signs of a struggle, no clear motive for foul play. The case was closed within weeks, but Melanie's sister Rachel never believed it. She was afraid of heights, Rachel told anyone who would listen. She would never go near that edge. But her concerns were dismissed as grief. The report was finalized, life moved on, until a single email reopened everything. 15 years later, a new detective named Jonah Price was assigned to digitize old case files. While reviewing Melanie's records, he noticed something odd. The original crime scene photos didn't match the written report. According to the report, Melanie's car had mechanical failure, but the photos showed no damage consistent with a breakdown. In fact, the hood appeared unopened. The engine clean. Another inconsistency followed. The report stated Melanie was alone that night, yet a blurry reflection in one photo showed what looked like a second figure near the ravine's edge. It had never been logged. Detective Price dug deeper. He pulled phone records from AR. Chives that hadn't existed digitally at the time. Melanie had received multiple calls the night she died, all from the same number. That number belonged to Eric Dalton, a coworker. Back then, Eric had been interviewed briefly. He said Melanie had called him earlier, upset about work, but insisted he hadn't seen her that night. With no evidence to contradict him, police had moved on. But now the data told a different story. Cell tower pings placed Eric near the ravine within minutes of Melanie's last known activity. When questioned again 15 years later, Eric claimed he barely remembered her. Said he had moved on, had a family, a business, a clean life. But investigators weren't finished. They found old emails stored on a forgotten company server. Messages between Melanie and Eric showed growing tension. She had accused him of sabotaging her work and threatened to report him to management. One message sent hours before her death read, "If you don't meet me tonight, I'm going to HR tomorrow." Eric did meet her. Under renewed questioning, his calm demeanor began to crack. He changed his story twice, then a third time. Finally, confronted with the phone data, the photos, and the emails, he admitted the truth. They had argued at the ravine overlook. He said she was angry, yelling. He claimed she stepped too close to the edge. But evidence showed blunt force trauma inconsistent with a fall. The confrontation had turned violent. The case that had been closed for 15 years was reopened and rewritten. At trial, prosecutors focused on how assumptions had replaced investigation, how a rushed conclusion allowed a killer to walk free for over a decade. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict. When the verdict was read, Melanie's sister wept quietly. She never stopped fighting, she said later, even when no one else believed her. The case became a reminder taught in police training seminars. A closed file doesn't always mean a solved case. Sometimes it only means the truth hasn't been questioned yet. Anna Lewis, a 34-year-old single mother, lived in a quiet apartment complex where neighbors mostly kept to themselves. She was polite, hardworking, and known for helping others when she could. If someone needed a ride, help carrying groceries, or someone to watch their pet, Anna usually said yes. That kindness would cost her everything. One evening, her neighbor Derek Moore knocked on her door. He said his car wouldn't start and asked if she could give him a ride to a nearby gas station. It was late, but Anna agreed. She grabbed her keys, told her sister she'd be back soon, and stepped outside. She never returned. When Anna failed to pick up her son from daycare the next day, panic set in. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her car was missing. Police quickly located it abandoned on a side road several miles away, doors unlocked, keys gone. Inside were Anna's purse and phone. There were no signs of a struggle. At first, detectives believed she may have been carjacked or met with an unknown attacker. But attention soon turned back to Derek, the last person known to have seen her. He told police Anna had dropped him off at the gas station, waited until his car started, and then driven away. He said he went home and fell asleep. But surveillance footage told a different story. Cameras at the gas station showed Anna's car arriving, but only one person got out. Derek, the driver's seat was empty. Investigators reviewed nearby traffic cameras and discovered Anna's car never actually stopped long enough for a normal exchange. It rolled in, paused briefly, and then continued down the road. Phone data placed Derek's phone inside the car long after he claimed to have exited. When confronted, he changed his story. Said Anna had offered to drive him farther. Then said she panicked and left suddenly. Each version contradicted. The last, police obtained a warrant to search Derek's apartment. Inside, they found Anna's car keys hidden inside a shoe. In the trash were cleaning supplies and gloves. Under the sink, a small stain tested positive for blood. Faced with the evidence, Derek finally confessed. He admitted that once Anna was driving, he began arguing with her. He claimed he had been struggling financially and believed she owed him help. When she refused, he lashed out. He said it happened faster than he could think. Afterward, he drove her car, abandoned it, and tried to erase every trace. What shocked investigators most was how ordinary the beginning had been. A neighbor asking for help. A kind woman saying yes. At trial, prosecutors emphasized how manipulation and entitlement can turn everyday interactions into danger. Derek was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Anna's family later released a statement, urging people to trust their instincts and never feel obligated to help when something feels wrong. She was kind, her sister said. And kindness should never be a death sentence. Today, Anna's story is shared in safety awareness programs across the state. Because sometimes, the most devastating crimes don't begin with threats or violence. They begin with a simple favor. When Michael Turner disappeared, everyone assumed he had chosen to leave. He was 36, recently divorced and struggling financially. Friends said he talked often about starting over. So when he stopped answering calls and failed to show up for work, people believed he had finally done just that. Even police leaned toward the same conclusion. His apartment was mostly empty. Clothes were gone. His laptop was missing. There were no signs of a struggle. His car was found parked legally near a bus station, unlocked, as if he had walked away on purpose. The case was quietly classified as a voluntary disappearance. But one person never accepted that explanation. His younger sister, Claire. Michael had promised to call her the night before he vanished. He never did. And more importantly, he had left behind something he never would have abandoned. A notebook where he tracked every bill, every plan, every future goal. Claire kept pushing for answers, but years passed with no movement, until a construction project changed everything. 6 years later, during renovations of an old warehouse on the edge of town, workers uncovered human remains, sealed inside a narrow crawl space behind a false wall. The area had once been used for short-term storage by multiple small businesses. The remains were eventually identified as Michael Turner. The discovery stunned investigators and reopened a case no one had looked at in years. Forensic analysis showed blunt force trauma. Michael had not left voluntarily. He had been killed. The question became, who had access to that warehouse? Records showed that at the time of Michael's disappearance, the building was shared by several small companies. One of them was a delivery and logistics startup where Michael had briefly worked. Police pulled old employee rosters. One name stood out, Evan Price, a supervisor who had clashed repeatedly with Michael over missing inventory and internal complaints. Old emails recovered from company backups revealed escalating tension. Michael had accused Evan of falsifying records and stealing equipment. In one message, Michael wrote, "I won't be part of this. If this doesn't stop, I'm going to report it." Investigators now had motive. Phone data from years earlier was reanalyzed using newer techniques. It placed both men near the warehouse late on the night Michael vanished, so anything that hadn't been detectable at the time. When detectives interviewed Evan again, he initially denied remembering much, said it was ancient history, claimed he barely knew Michael, but inconsistencies piled up. Eventually, confronted with the evidence, Evan admitted they had argued inside the warehouse. He claimed Michael threatened to expose him. Tempers flared. The confrontation turned physical. He said he panicked when Michael collapsed and didn't wake up. Instead of calling for help, he hid the body behind a false wall he knew about from renovation plans. Then he quit the company and moved on with his life. For 6 years, he lived normally. Married, had children, built a career, while Michael's family waited in uncertainty. At trial, prosecutors emphasized how time had protected the crime, not erased it. "This case wasn't unsolved," one prosecutor said. "It was just waiting for the truth to catch up." Evan was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. When the verdict was read, Claire cried quietly in the courtroom. Later she spoke to reporters. "They told me he left on purpose," she said, "but I knew my brother. He wouldn't just disappear." The case became a powerful reminder to investigators nationwide. Some crimes don't reveal themselves quickly. They hide in forgotten places, behind old walls and outdated assumptions, waiting years for someone to finally look again. For more than 12 years, the case of Daniel Price sat untouched in the cold case archive. Daniel was 41, a quiet warehouse supervisor with a strict routine and a small circle of friends. One winter night he left work late and never made it home. His car was found parked legally near his apartment, keys missing, no damage, no signs of struggle. Police searched for months, then years. Nothing. Eventually the case was labeled inactive. Not solved, not closed, just forgotten. Everyone assumed Daniel had walked away from his life. Everyone except his mother. She kept his room exactly the same, paid his phone bill for years, left his porch light on every night. She believed, with a certainty that never faded, that her son hadn't left willingly. Time passed. Detectives retired. Files gathered dust. Then, one ordinary morning, a routine database update changed everything. A forensic analyst reviewing old evidence uploads noticed something strange in an archived audio file linked to Daniel's case. It was a voicemail, one that had been dismissed years earlier as background noise. With newer audio software, the analyst cleaned it up. What emerged was a voice in the background, low but clear. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." The voice didn't belong to Daniel. The timestamp showed the voicemail had been recorded just minutes before his phone went dead. Investigators reopened the case immediately. They cross-referenced the voice against archived interviews from the original investigation. After hours of comparison, one match stood out. The voice belonged to Caleb Rourke, a coworker Daniel had argued with repeatedly over missing inventory and falsified records. At the time, Caleb had been questioned briefly and released. There was no physical evidence tying him to the disappearance. Now there was something new. Detectives re-examined Caleb's past movements using updated location analysis. Old phone pings, once too vague to matter, now showed a clear overlap with Daniel's last known location. They also uncovered emails Daniel had written but never sent, drafts accusing Caleb of fraud and threatening to go to management. The motive became clear. When questioned again more than a decade later, Caleb tried to laugh it off. "That's ancient history," he said. "You can't pin anything on me now." But he was wrong. A search warrant led investigators to a rural storage property Caleb had owned years earlier. Using ground-penetrating equipment, they detected an anomaly beneath a concrete slab poured shortly after Daniel disappeared. What they found confirmed the truth. Confronted with the evidence, Caleb finally broke. He admitted that Daniel had confronted him late one night. Words turned into threats. Anger turned into violence. Panic followed. He had spent 12 years believing he'd gotten away with it. The arrest stunned the community. Many had known Caleb as a reliable worker, a family man, someone who had moved on. Few could reconcile that image with the truth revealed in court. At sentencing, the judge spoke directly to him. You lived freely while a family lived in limbo. Justice delayed is not justice denied. It is justice waiting. Daniel's mother attended every hearing. When the verdict was read, she closed her eyes and whispered his name. Later, she spoke to reporters. I never stopped believing, she said. I just didn't know when the truth would come. The case became a reminder used in law enforcement training across the country. Time doesn't erase truth. Silence doesn't protect guilt. And justice, even when delayed, has a way of finding its moment.